Chapter 10. After resting for a week and reassembling our outfit, the combined expedition set out for the ancient city of the Uyghurs, where we arrived June 30th. Here we set to work immediately, and when the first pit was down to a depth of 50 feet, we encountered the walls of an ancient building. When we had proceeded to a depth of a little more than 90 feet, we broke into a large room where there were a number of gold, silver, bronze, and clay statues, all beautifully wrought. After the work had progressed far enough to prove beyond a question of doubt that this had once been a very large city, we went on to the second location. Here we went down about 40 feet before we came upon anything that could be called definite proof of a former civilization. Again, we did enough work to prove that we were in the ruins of a large ancient city. We removed to a third location where we expected to find evidence that would prove this the oldest and largest of the three cities. In order to conserve time and resources, we had organized our forces into 4 parties. 3 of these parties were made up of a leader and 6 assistants. This gave 7 men to each party. To this combined force was assigned all the excavation work and its management, each party being assigned 8 hours out of the 24. The 4th party, consisting of the remainder of the personnel of the expedition, was assigned the duties of the camp. I was in the party of which our chief was the leader. We were assigned the 8 hours from midnight until 8 in the morning. After we had completed the discovery of the first pit and had gained access to 4 of the underground chambers or rooms, we cleared away enough of the debris to show beyond a question of doubt that this was the oldest and largest city of the 3 and that it was rich in treasure. One morning, the party which relieved our chief's party reported that there were horsemen approaching our camp from the north. When we reached the surface, we found they were headed in our direction, and it looked as though they were another bandit band, since they were evidently following the trail we made on our way there. As we stood looking, Jast came up and said, "They are a party of bandits who are determined to loot the camp, but I do not think we need fear." We waited for them to approach, and they came on to within 500 yards of our camp, then halted. After a short interval, 2 of the men rode up and, after exchanging greetings, asked what we were doing there. They were told we were attempting to find a ruined city. To this they replied they did not believe a word of what we said. They suspected we were looking for gold, and they had come to take our equipment and supplies from us. We asked if they were government soldiers, to which they replied they did not recognize any government, as the strongest party was the one that won in that country. As they saw no evidence of firearms, I believe they came to the conclusion that there must be a larger force than was evidenced by what they could see. They returned to their band to talk over the situation. After a time, the 2 came back and told us that if we submitted peacefully, they would not harm any of us, but if we did not, they would advance and shoot everyone who showed resistance. We were given 10 minutes to decide, and after that time they would advance without further preliminaries. To this, Jas replied that we would neither resist nor surrender. This seemed to anger them, and, wheeling their horses, they started back toward the band, waving their arms. Then the whole band came toward us at full gallop. I confess that I was badly frightened, but almost instantly we seemed to be surrounded by a number of shadowy forms on horseback, galloping around us. Then these forms became more lifelike and increased in numbers. Evidently, our visitors had seen what we were witnessing, for their horses were either reined in quickly or stopped of their own accord as they began to rear and plunge and get beyond control of their riders. In a moment there was wild confusion among the band, which numbered about 75 horsemen. The horses began plunging right and left beyond all control of the riders, and this ended in a wild retreat, with our phantom horsemen, as we called them, in close pursuit. After the excitement was over, our chief and 2 of the party, including myself, walked out to where the main band had halted and could find no tracks except those made by the robbers themselves. We were very much mystified at this, since the relief had looked as real to us as did the bandits, and the rescuers had seemed to have come from all sides. We fully expected to find the tracks of their horses in the sand, as well as the tracks of the horses the bandits were riding. When we returned, Jas said, "The phantom horsemen, as you call them, were only pictures made so real that you, as well as the bandits, could see them. In a word, they were the pictures of other occurrences that were able to produce in so lifelike a manner that they could not be distinguished from the real occurrence. We are able to produce them for our own protection as well as for that of others, and no one has been harmed. Where a definite purpose is served, there is no harm in the outcome. A doubt had arisen in the mind of the bandits. It was not logical that an expedition like this would venture so far away without some protection, and we were able to take advantage of this to frighten them. They were very superstitious and always on the lookout for trickery. That type is the most susceptible to fear, and they saw just what they expected to find. If we had not used this method, we should, in all probability, have been obliged to destroy a number of the band before they would have left us in peace. As it is, we shall hear no more of them. We were not molested again. After we had accomplished sufficient work to convince us that these 3 cities existed, it was suggested that we should fill all the pits, in order to protect them from any roving bands that might discover the work, as such a discovery would lead to wholesale plundering for the treasure alone. There are legends among nearly all these bands that these great cities exist and that they contain hoards of gold. As we finished work, each pit was filled so as to leave as little trace as possible, and the first storm would remove any trace which had been left. The sand is continually shifting in this country, and this alone makes it very difficult to locate any of these ruins. It would have been impossible for us to discover any of the locations without the assistance of our friends. We were told that similar ruins extend well into southern Siberia. There is unmistakable evidence that a vast population had flourished here, and that they had reached a high state of civilization. There is also unlimited proof that these people understood agriculture, mining, textiles, and their allied industries, reading, writing, and all the sciences. It is evident that the history of these people is the history of the Aryan race. While seated at the table the afternoon of our last day, one of the party asked Emil whether the history of this great race could be traced and written. He answered that it could, that the city beneath the site of our camp contained the absolute proof and written records, which, when found and translated, would give a concurrent and direct history of this people. Here the conversation was interrupted by a man appearing at the door of the tent and asking if he could come in. Emil, Jast, and Chandra Sin arose and hurried to the entrance to meet him. By the greetings extended, we saw they were very well acquainted, and our chief rose and joined them. At the door of the tent we saw him stop and stare for a moment. Then he walked quickly out of the door with both hands extended, saying, "Well, well, this is indeed a surprise." A medley of voices arose as both men and women began to exchange greetings with him and the 3 that had stepped through the door after him. At this, all seated at the table arose and crowded outside, where we found a group of 14 newcomers. The party included Emil's mother, our hostess from the village of our former winter quarters, the beautiful lady who had presided at the banquet that we attended in Emil's home, and Emil's son and daughter. In all, they were a merry crowd, and it brought back remembrances of gatherings of former days. The surprise was complete, and we showed it, but the most complete surprise was shown by the friends who had joined us on the expedition. As we looked at them, we knew that their curiosity was getting beyond all bounds. They had not seen these appearances and disappearances as we had, and during the press of expedition work, we had been so engrossed that we had neglected to tell them of anything but fragmentary incidents. Coming, as this had, virtually from a clear sky, it left them absolutely nonplussed. Of course, we were heartily enjoying this at their expense. After introductions and greetings had been extended all around, the man who had charge of the camp and equipment sought Emil and our chief. With every evidence of abject helplessness, he said, "How am I going to feed all these people? Our supplies have not yet arrived, and we have barely enough provisions left for ourselves for this and the morning meal, since we have made every arrangement to start on our return trip." While they were conversing, They had drawn together, and the leader of the combined expedition had overheard a part of the conversation. He stepped over and joined them. As he did so, I could hear him ask, "Where in the name of heaven did all these people come from?" Our chief looked at him with a smile and said, "You have just hit it, Ray. They did come direct from heaven. See, there are no conveyances." Ray answered, "But the thing that puzzles me most is they don't seem to have any wings. As they do not have wings, we should have heard the thud when they landed in the sand, especially as there are so many of them. But we did not even hear that. So we are going to decide for the time that your suggestion is right and perfectly logical." Emil then turned to the company and said he would be obliged, in order to allay the fears of the steward, to admonish the visitors for not bringing along their provisions. At this the steward seemed greatly embarrassed, and said he did not think of putting it quite so bluntly, but nevertheless the fact still remained that there certainly were not enough edibles to go around. Here the visitors joined in a merry laugh, which seemed to embarrass him still more. Then Emil's mother said there was no need for embarrassment or inconvenience. Our hostess and the beautiful lady joined in saying they would gladly take charge and be responsible for the supper, as they fully expected to share the meal with us. This relieved the steward, and he quickly accepted the proffered service. The afternoon was now well advanced. It was one of those days in the Gobi when the weather fairly fawns upon the earth for one moment, then in the next instant may transform the scene into an inferno of relentless fury. Every available canvas was secured and spread upon the sand just outside the circle of the camp. To an outsider the scene would have had the appearance of a merry picnic party, which indeed it was. When the canvas was all spread, the containers, which were used both for cooking and serving the camp meals, were brought out with their contents and placed on the canvas. Then the whole company gathered round. We could still see evidences of wonder and perplexity on the faces of those who had lately joined the party. Ray, the leader, looked at the containers and said that if he saw rightly the amount of food the containers held, and if that amount could be stretched sufficiently to feed the hungry mob, he was going to keep his eyes open for the performance of a miracle. One of our party said, "You better keep your eyes wide open, for that is just what you are going to see." Our chief said, "That is twice you have suggested right today, Ray." At this the three ladies began serving from the containers. As each plate was served, it was passed on, and an empty plate was received for the full one until all had been served most generously. As the serving progressed, we could see that Ray was getting more restless, and when his plate came to him, he passed it on, remarking that he could get along with a much less liberal helping. Our hostess assured him that he need not fear, as there would be a plentiful supply for all. After all had been served bountifully, he again looked at the containers. When he saw that the containers had not been diminished, he rose and said, "At the risk of being impolite, ill-mannered, and a bounder, I am going to ask if I may sit by you three ladies, as I fully acknowledge my curiosity has so deliberately taken the upper hand that I cannot eat a bite." The ladies said they would look upon it as an act of courtesy if he wished to sit by them, whereupon he walked over and sat down on the edge of the canvas between Emil's mother and the beautiful lady. When he was seated, someone asked for the bread. There was but one piece remaining on the box lid that served in place of a tray. The beautiful lady held out her hands, and almost instantly there was a large loaf of bread in them. This she passed to our hostess, who began cutting it, preparatory to serving. At this the leader arose and asked if they would kindly permit him to see the loaf as it was. The loaf was passed to him, and after examining it critically for a moment, he passed it back. We could see that he was very much agitated. He walked away for a few steps, then returned, and, addressing himself directly to the lady, said, "I do not wish to seem impertinent, but this has muddled my thoughts to such an extent that I cannot refrain from asking questions." She bowed and said he was at liberty to ask any questions he wished. He said, "Do you mean to tell me that you are able to set aside all the known natural laws, at least those that we know of, without the least exertion, and bring forth bread from an unseen or invisible supply?" The lady replied, "To us the supply is not unseen. It is always visible." Then it was perceived that as our hostess cut and served the loaf, it did not diminish. He became more calm, again took his place, and the lady continued, "If you could only see that the tragedy of Jesus' life ended with the crucifixion, that the joy of the Christ life began with the resurrection, and that the goal of every life should be the resurrection rather than the crucifixion. In this way, all may follow him into the more abundant life of the Christ in them. Can you think of a more joyous and abundant life than to be one with this mighty power, this power of the Christ within? It is here you may know that you were created to have dominion over every form, thought, word, or condition. In living this life, which is the fulfillment of every need, you will find that you are living an exact scientific life. Jesus increased the few loaves and fishes the little lad had until he was able to supply ample for the multitude. You will observe that he bade them sit down in an orderly, expectant attitude, ready to receive the increased supply by fulfilling the law. If you are to find joy and satisfaction in the life of Jesus, you must fulfill the law of his life by acting in harmony with his ideals. You cannot stand and worry as to how you are to be fed. If Jesus had allowed this, the multitude never would have been satisfied. Instead, he quietly blessed and gave thanks for that which he had, and the supply was increased in sufficient measure to meet every need. Living did not become a difficult problem until man disobeyed and refused to listen to the inner voice. When he returns and again learns to listen to that inner voice, he will cease to labor for the means of a living, but he will work for the joy of creating. He will enter into the joy of creating, and he will create under the law of the Lord or word of God. Through his word he will find that he can move upon the all-loving and all-enfolding substance of God and bring into visibility every ideal he holds in thought. It was in this way, step by step, that Jesus mounted to the heights and proved the supremacy of the Christ in him over the limited concept of immortal thought. When this is realized, work becomes a joyous quality of one's being. Jesus proved that the truly spiritual life is the only joyous life. He became clothed with dignity and glory because of his victory. Yet that victory left him as free as a little child. Although the world is not wholly awake to its desire, it is this desire of joy and great blessing that it is seeking. Man may seek satisfaction in the pursuit of personal things, unmindful of the law that says he shall lose that which he seeks for selfish gain. But through the losing he soon finds that the fall of the personal but marks the ascent of the spiritual. He realizes that man's extremity is God's opportunity. You must know that you are entitled to every good and perfect gift of God, and you must prepare to receive those gifts through the knowledge of God as your divine nature. If you separate yourselves from God in thought, you will also separate yourselves from him in manifestation. In order to enter fully into the joy of life, you must seek life and joy for the fullness and joy that the life gives to all humanity. The laws for the establishment of heaven here on earth, which Jesus taught, and which you have seen applied in a very small measure, are exact and scientific. Man, being the son and true likeness of God, contains within himself the true Spirit of God, his Father. He can discern and use the laws of his creative parent and bring them into full operation in his world of affairs, if he only will. Then she said they would be pleased to answer any questions he might like to ask. Ray said he did not have any questions to ask, for he had been too deeply stirred to want to ask questions. He just wanted to think. He said he had some things he wanted to say, and he hoped they would not take offense, for offense was not intended in any way. He continued, "We came here, as we supposed, to find the remains of a people long since dead and gone. Instead, we find a people living a far more wonderful and active life than can be comprehended. If this thing that we have seen could be heralded abroad, you would have the whole world bowing at your feet." The three ladies said they did not wish the world to bow at their feet, but they longed to see all mankind bowing at God's feet. They went on to say that mankind already had too many idols. The ideal was the thing really needed. Here the visitors, with the exception of the one who had called at the door of the tent, arose, saying they must be on their way. With hearty handshakes and Godspeed and invitations to visit them at any time, they disappeared as suddenly as they had come, leaving Ray and his party staring at the place where they had stood. After a moment, he turned to the man who had remained and asked his name. He was told that it was Bagot Irand. Then Ray said to him, "Do you mean to say that you are able to come and go at will, without any visible means of conveyance, as we have just seen, defying every known law of gravity or physics?" Bagot Irand answered, "We do not defy any law, neither do we harm a single law of man or God. We cooperate with and work according to all laws, both of nature and God. The means of locomotion which we use, although invisible to you, are perfectly visible to us. The trouble is you do not see them, consequently you do not believe. We see, believe, and know, and we are able to utilize them. When you open your understanding to know and see and use them, you will soon find that the law which we use is definite and far more capable of being put to greater use for mankind than the limited laws which you see and use. Some day you will find that you have only touched the surface of man's possibilities. We are always pleased to assist you in any way we can." Chander Singh said that this friend had come to invite us to return to our outfitting point by way of his village, as the trail was shorter and the distance could be made with 1 day less travel at this time of year. This invitation was readily accepted, and Bagot Irand said he would return with us. It developed later that he was a descendant of the once prosperous people that had inhabited the Gobi region.